Bonnie Kellert is in constant demand as an educator, performer, lecturer, mentor, and masterclass presenter. She has performed solo recitals at leading venues around Washington, D.C., and on radio and television in the U.S. and abroad. Bonnie has published pedagogical articles in Keyboard Companion and the Pedagogy Forum. She also has presented talks and master classes for numerous MTNA chapters in Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina, and Tennessee. Bonnie currently maintains her private studio in Potomac, Maryland. Her students have won numerous awards and performed in master classes with leading pianists, including Ruth Laredo, Susan Starr, Brian Gans, Leon Bates, Marvin Blickenstaff, and others. Bonnie earned her Bachelor of Music and Master of Music at the Peabody Conservatory of Music and is a scholarship student of Leon Fleischer. In 2016, she was presented with Steinway's Outstanding Teacher of the Year Award. And I know that she spoke with us back in 2020. Her presentation was just fabulous. And I know personally I'm looking forward to this greatly. And so I hope that everyone will enjoy this and find this a wonderful resource today for you. And without further ado, here's Bonnie Kellert. There she is.
Good morning, everyone. I hope this finds everybody well. I know you're getting snow. Ours just twinkled away, so we're not going to get very much down here. This presentation is about analyze and memorize, two very important concepts that are joined together as you learn and your students learn their music, and that they should start memorizing as right away as they are learning the notes. Here we have a picture of Handel sneaking away at night, and his parents find him, and he's got a little map in his head. We are going to talk about mapping today. Please pay attention. This is a restricted use. Copyright music examples and other material may be included to illustrate and clarify topics solely for teaching and educational purposes. Fair use allows limited use of copyrighted material without permission from the copyright holder for purposes such as criticism, research, scholarship, teaching, and education. No copying, recording, duplication, or replay of this talk or the handouts is permitted without my express consent. Thank you, Bonnie Kellert. Okay, this is a quick outline of what I'm going to cover. I have an introduction, a discussion of memory. Excuse me, my allergies are kicking in. Advantages of memorizing, analyze and memorize, oral, visual, and kinetic senses, mapping, choreography, practicing with mapping, extra skills like improvisation and storytelling, modern music, goals for performers, and do these methods work? I don't assume, and I hope you don't assume, that your students know how to memorize. Teach your students how to memorize with success. We're going to analyze and memorize, create maps with hints, integrate various approaches. We're going to conquer the fear of playing music from memory and retain memorized repertoire. What is memory? Memory is when information is learned, stored, and retrieved. Short-term memory, which I call STM, is finger and muscle memory and is the least reliable. I've just lost my.
No.
I
messed up.
You did. First of all, I want to thank Mainline for inviting me. I forgot to say that. And then my husband, who does all of my technical stuff, which has now just disappeared in front of me. Okay, honey, there we go. And then there's long-term memory, which is far more dependable, learning and storing and retrieving the information that's been learned. What are the advantages of memorizing? Sometimes it's required or expected, like in a recital or a competition. Playing or performance is improved when it's memorized. It's unencumbered by sight reading. Improve the mental skills. Learn to focus and concentrate. Learn faster, efficiently, and correctly. Improve security. And perform with concentration on the stylistic interpretation and expression. Analyzing and memorizing. Analyzing is essential toward memorizing securely. The ideas I'll be discussing are similar and they apply to different pieces. What does the music sound like? We can use harmonic analysis and structure, the melodic structure and phrase stating, patterns and repetitive ideas and sequences. And now here is a very quick example from the Little Prelude of Bach, the BWV 999, which I'm sure you all know. I really love to teach this to my students because it is so easy to apply the mapping and all kinds of ideas for memorizing and learning. Now, the next slides are going to show mapping examples, which I will explain in more detail later. I have applied a shorthand, and that was included in your handout. My students use this shorthand, and they also add their own ideas. Now, it might look a little bit complicated to you, but basically, the wiggly lines are arpeggios, and the straight lines are scales, and sometimes I use harmonic analysis. So this is just an example of what you could see. And then we take the music away, and the kids are reading off a map. And then they put this map in their head, hopefully, and they play without the map. Another example is the Soldier's March of Schumann, another one of our well-used pieces for kids. Okay. Now, this is what the analysis could look like. There are a lot of variations. The brown line that you see is a melodic idea, and then it repeats on the next line. And again, you see the arrows, which are indicating shape, whether the scales are going up or down. And at the very end, in measure 8, you'll see I wrote the letter D. Well, that's a shared note. They both have Ds. Now, this is what it would look like without the music. Now, continuing with analyzing and memorizing, you want to look for the cadences. You want to memorize the mood and the colors and the dynamics, and definitely the articulation. And how to visualize the notes while playing. The interpretation with stylistic tendencies. And I ask my students to invent a story when appropriate. Okay. I have 3 senses I want to discuss: oral, visual, and kinetic. Before the mapping process can begin, the piece has to be learned and analyzed. The oral, visual, and the kinetic senses can help with this process. The oral sense. How does the music sound? To play anything correctly, it must be first in your head. And Mr. Fleischer used to say, if you can sing it, you can play it. So it's definitely part of your whole being. Singing supports the internalization process. I also suggest that my students be strong with their rhythmic and oral security by clapping and tapping rhythms and counting out loud, and finger practicing silently. Sometimes we do it on the arm or on the leg, or close the keyboard cover. And that's also very useful when they go on travel, when they don't have a piano and they can do it on a tabletop. They should learn short, repetitive motifs and then sing. Play the accompaniment and sing the melody. With the visual sense, what does the music look like on the page. Investigate and understand the composer's intentions. Respect the score with meticulous attention to all details. And I can't repeat that enough to my students about respecting the score. Visualize the score and hear the notes in your head before playing. See an imaginary keyboard and see how the fingers move. Learn and secure the left hand, which usually has the harmony. And as we all know, Walter Gieseking always knew the left hand of any piece he ever learned. Visualize the music while playing. Rely on harmonic and structural analysis. Cluster the notes. Observe what notes change and remain the same. Look at the bigger picture instead of individual notes. Think in chunks. Delve into more detail and then revert back to larger ideas. We will take all of these things later when we do the mapping. In the kinetic sense, it is finger memory that is employed. Finger memory employs sensory patterns in the finger and how these patterns look and feel on the keys. Dependence on finger memory or muscle memory is brought about by repetition and is not entirely reliable. Finger memory works in very fast passages. Finger practice slowly and silently and work hands separate and maybe even recite the fingering hints out loud. Now, analysis and memorization through mapping. The mapping is going to combine the oral and the visual and the kinetic senses with analysis. And mapping can be visualized mentally, but is best done when written out. Here is an example of what it will look like as a procedure. I beg your pardon. Excuse me a moment. On the left, you see it says sheet music. Again, this is the example of the little Bach prelude. And then what we do is we take tracing paper and we lay it over the music. I'm going to talk about that in more detail in a moment. And then we draw where all the bar lines are and start to draw hints onto the tracing paper. And the tracing paper is still sitting on top of the music. And then in the last one, you can see they're mapping hints without the music. So the procedure is that the student might play just one or two measures, play with the map, and then play without the map. Okay, now we're going to discuss how to create a map. Draw crosshairs at the top of the sheet music to be used as an alignment marker. Lay a piece of tracing paper over the sheet music. Sometimes I put a little tiny piece of Scotch tape so that it can come off easily. Trace the crosshairs onto the tracing paper. Work one page at a time. And trace the bar lines so that the measures match precisely. Fill the measures with hints in pencil so that ideas can be added or subtracted. The hints can represent what will be memorized and thought about while practicing and performing. And colors can be used to enhance the details. The procedure for using the maps. Read a short passage from the score and imagine how it sounds. Make observations and fill in anything you want to remember. Play while looking at the music. Play several times until you're secure, saying the hints out loud. Refer to the map to assure that your observations match markings on the map. Play the same passage, repeating several times using just the map. And then play by memory, recalling the map hints. Identify motifs, patterns, and sequences. We visualize the music and how does the score look. And we imagine the notes and the intervals, the arpeggios, the scales, and the phrase direction. Identify motifs and phrases with different colors. Observe how phrases and harmonic progressions provide a broader picture. After a time, reconsider map markings and edit appropriately so you can add or delete hints. Fewer markings are better. The performer has to be able to recall all the markings on the map. Mapping with hints and adopting a notation system. We want to put it all together, analyzing the themes, the modulations, the key relationships, the cadences, etc. These ideas can also be applied to a mental image. Include only hints that bring to mind what you have discovered. You're welcome to use my notations. Okay, an overall plan of form and structure. Very quickly, I'll just read through these because you have the handout with all of it written. We will show that in a moment. A triad is represented by a square. Scales by a straight line with an arrow indicating the direction. A chromatic scale is represented by wiggly, pointy lines, and a half step, a caret, is part of that chromatic. An octave with a long rectangle. Thirds, which are part of a square, can be on the side or upside down or sideways. Arpeggios are represented by wavy lines and shared notes by dotted lines connecting the shared notes. And black keys can be colored. I use red for black and I use blue for white. And then you can color black white or white black to indicate how a chord is constructed. Phrases use color to show repeated phrases, indicate repeated patterns and motifs with a color. Group notes into motifs in color code. Sequences can be color coded. Two parallel lines can indicate parallel motion. Contrary motion can be represented by two lines in separate opposite direction. A sustained note with a long horizontal line and a pedal point, again, maybe with a long horizontal line. And this is what I use for my shorthand. You'll notice at the top where it says chords, there's 3 with a circle and 2 with a circle. So, for example, if the chord had 3 notes, or if the chord had 2 notes. A sustained note, as you see, a straight line, I use green. Stepping up, the arrow's going up. Stepping down, the arrow's going down. The skip, which is a third, which is part of a triad, which is right below that, as you can see, I took a fragment of a triad, since triads are made of thirds. And then a rectangle for an inversion. The arpeggio with a wiggly line going up and going down. You can see to the right that if the arpeggio begins on a black key, I put a red dot at the beginning. There's the caret indicating a half step, and there's the chromatic scale. Continuing, BL could just be black, and WH could be white. And the students learn that they have to accommodate the hand position by going in for black keys and out for white keys. So that's all part of choreography that we will discuss in a little while. The shared notes can be as indicated or with a dotted line, and the octave with a very narrow rectangle. A fourth could be a curvy line or any other interval you could decide. Then the contrary motion, it's very useful to use this, especially in more modern music. So then I have going in the same direction, the opposite direction, okay. Now, if we look at the Bartók piece that I have up there now, it's a Hungarian folk song, you'll notice right away in each top corner it says alignment marker. So there are the crosshairs to make sure that I get the tracing paper precisely in the right place. And measure numbers definitely help. So if we go to the next slide. Oh, yes, my husband suggests, why don't I play that? Good idea. This might look very complicated to you if you're not the least bit used to it, but I have put a lot of things on the page so that you have options to choose from about what you would like to use for your memory hints. In the first measure, it looks like a big check mark, but it is actually showing you the G goes down to the F sharp and then rises up to G and then to A in the next measure. In the second measure, it says skips. So there's where I've used that little part of the square, the A down to F sharp down to D. Notice in the bass clef, I wrote a D, just to remind myself, well, or the student, and the D goes through the first four measures. Measure 3 is a repeat. Now, in measure 5, I wrote parallel, and I have a line going down representing a scale, because in the right hand, D, C sharp, D, and in the left hand, the bottom voice, B, A, G. And then again in measure 7, you can see the thirds in the left hand. So maybe you're just getting an idea about what could happen. In the next slide, this is what it would look like. And the student has practiced enough that they really can read off their maps. If they only do 2 measures a day, they could do an entire piece solidly in 10 to 14 days. And they really have it in their heads. And how many times has your student come in and said, I memorized this last week, but I forgot it. So don't want that to happen. We want to have long-term memory. Okay. Now this is another way of looking at the Bartok. The left hand shows that the first interval is a second, and then a third, and a fifth, and a sixth, and then the next measure, a second, a third, and a seventh. So the hand keeps going further and further apart. Then you can also see it from measure 4 to 5 that I drew that skinny rectangle. Well, the last note in the right hand is a D, and then it moves up an octave to another D. Notice the wiggly lines for the arpeggios. In measure 2, it's a D chord, but it's an arpeggio. D, F sharp, A, F sharp, D. And the same thing in measure 4. We also have a wiggly line in measure 6, where the triad is broken up into a rolled chord or an arpeggio. Next. And then this is what it would look like without the music. Now you'll notice that things can be done in pencil, it can be added, it can be subtracted. It is totally up to the student what to do. I try to help them get started at the lesson with their maps, and I'm always so pleased to see that they do usually 1 or 2 measures on their own each day. Okay. Pardon me? Oh, we have another example. Now, I've got more color in this one. Notice the first measure has a dot in red. That's for the F sharp. And then in the second measure, another red for the F sharp. That's to remind my left hand what's going on. Okay. And then in measure 4, all this green, lots of D's. And then when I get down to measure 6, I have more red with the F sharp. And if you look at the measure 7, I have 2 arrows so that both thirds are moving upward. And then the right hand is moving down in the opposite direction. This one has a combination of harmonic analysis. So measure 2, it says D major. And then when I get to measure 6, it says D major. And when I get to measure 8, it says G. So I'm keeping in mind what the student is capable of knowing as far as theory. Don't push them beyond what they don't know. And here we are with just a map. Suggestions for choreography hints. Choreography denotes movements in the fingers, hand, wrist, forearm, upper arm, body to accommodate intervals and hand shapes on the keyboard. Choreography directly influences articulation. Learn choreography immediately and memorize the gestures. And I can't stress this enough because when there are slur marks and phrase marks, the student needs to learn the gestures immediately. You can't expect them a month later to suddenly put in gestures to lift up and breathe for a phrase. Feel the spatial features in the topography of the keyboard. Play inside the keys with a slight upward wrist for black keys. BL, I write in sometimes on their score for black, and go inward. So if they are playing a scale or a chord or even this piece with Bartok, the left hand has to move upward a little bit. Otherwise, it can't reach, the third finger can't reach. And there's a breath. And as far as dynamics go, they really need to know what they're doing so that they can use their arm accordingly. Play outside the keys with a slightly lower wrist position for the white keys. WH can indicate outside and slightly down. Integrate the fingering and the hand position to accommodate black and white keys. Suggestions for choreography. Continued. Articulation, like I just said, slurs, staccatos, and phrase endings must be learned from the get-go. Cluster notes to feel where the hand and the wrist and the arm are leading. This helps to prepare the fingers and hand position for the next notes. Now, the little Bach prelude that I showed at the beginning is a perfect example of clustering. If you have, and then the next one, and the next one is closer. So I have, so my students learn that particular piece using clusters, and it helps them really memorize the piece and analyze the piece. Intervallic exploration. Use fingering hints if needed. And shared fingering. For example, if in a piece, both third fingers are on an F sharp, you can make a notation about that. Suggestions for choreography continued. On the map, indicate black or white keys within a chord by writing bottom, top, middle. Here is an example of a triad with a black key on the top. For large chords, you could write stretch. For smaller chords, close. Cluster notes to feel where the hand and the wrist and the arm are leading. Intervallic exploration. Intervallic relationships affect the hand position. Be aware how the fingers relate to each other. Use fingering hints if needed. Now, if it was a half step, you can see where I used that caret. And there's a red on the first part and a blue on the second part. And that would mean to my students that the first note of that half step is black. And the next note is white. Black, white. And of course, the other way around, it would have been white, black. So if it's the blue and then the red. Now, those colors are just mine. I had an adult who did mapping, and she liked her black keys to be done in yellow. It can be whatever you want. Indicate shared fingerings. That is, the same fingering on particular notes. Now here is the Schumann Soldiers March, which we all know. It's a great piece to teach kids. Okay, now some kids have absolutely no trouble with this kind of piece, but other kids might have trouble because it bounces and moves around. Now, what they need to do is start looking for hints. So we'll go to the next, here we are. At the first measure, we see that both hands have an arrow going up. So the melody, everybody's moving up the piano. And then there's a green line that goes from the G through the first two measures. So I now know I keep my thumb and I'm just moving my fingers up and down. And I don't need to move too much, but I'm very aware that I'm going up and then down. And the left hand the same, going up and then down. Okay, now the next part might bother some kids because of the fingering. So they are in this position and they have to get over to the black key. So that means they have to go in. So they need to remember in for a black key. And here's the F sharp, and then go out for the next one. So going in and out very appropriately. And you can see the arrows in measure 3 where the notes get closer together. Now this is what it would look like on the map. Practicing with mapping. Observe the notes moving within a pattern and indicate where the changes occur, bottom and the top or the middle. And we will discuss examples of that in a few minutes. Do the harmonic analysis. Be sure to use the knowledge that the student has learned. Harmonies naturally flow and resolve and offer a reliable means of remembering. That is, cadence is a lot of times a dominant to a tonic. Cluster notes into groups and analyze the harmony in each group. Learn, analyze, and memorize by the measure, the phrase, or the section, and then put groups together. Don't proceed to the next group until the previous group is secure. Keep reviewing the previous measures, and that is really important. Tackle as little as 2 measures with each practice session. Now we're talking here about the mapping and practicing procedure. Landing places. Some students have places where they can land on in case of a memory slip. Well, this is all well and good, but the harmony may not match what the subsequent jumping around can sound just like that, and they don't match. So I find it better to know that the phrases are exactly what they are. I know them inside and out, and I know where the cadence points are, and I can go to a section ending and know everything about the structure of the piece. Here is an example, again, with the Chopin Prelude, Opus 28, number 4 in E minor. Now, things can get rather complicated when you have an advanced piece like this, but I like to look at what notes are changing. I'll go back to the piano here, it'll be easier to show. Notice how the thumb stays on the E for a measure and a half, but the left hand has a double arrow going down to measure 2, then the top note comes down. Now the bottom note comes down. Now the top note. Now the middle note. So it's kind of easy to remember bottom, top, bottom for the first 2 measures. Get that straight. And then add bottom, top, middle. So I'm going. Now the bottom notes. Now the thumb. Now the bottom. Now the top. Now the middle. Now the bottom. And I'm also keeping very careful observations about where the black keys are. Now, of course, we all know how to read that, but it is part of this memory process of knowing where the choreography is going, where my hand is going, so that when I look at the map on the next page, we went wrong way.
Sorry.
Oops. There we go. Now we went without. There we go. Now you can see that it's really easy because I've been saying the hints out loud to myself about what to do. And I want to make sure that I try not to do too much at once. Which way did you go, sweetie? There we go. Extra skills. Improvisation can be very useful. It uses stylistic tendencies and can aid in digging out from under and conveys continuity. Improvisation adds to your knowledge. I was at a concert with Rubinstein. It has to be, well, over, goodness, 40 years ago. And he was playing one of the dances from Tombeau de Couperin of Ravel. Not everybody knows the entire piece, but I happen to have learned the entire suite, and he got lost. And I was holding my breath, and for a good 5 or 8 seconds, he was improvising. And so his mind had to be thinking where he was in the music so he could get back to where he was while he was improvising. He's doing double duty here. And he got right back again. And I don't think anybody in the audience knew anything. It was really quite an amazing feat. He could play by ear and definitely could improvise. So that was a real advantage on his part there. Another extra skill for the students is to have a storyline. This helps them concentrate and focus on what the music is all about. While they're playing, they can think about their story. For example, maybe they've got characters in their family that are represented in the music, or they're telling an opera, or they've got kids at school. All the things that go on in their lives, they can reinvent the whole picture in their mind while they're playing. Stylistic tendencies of the composer and the composition are also part of this interpretation. Emotion, feelings, temperament give the performer other connections to the music. Additional observations: look for surprise and unexpected harmonies. Why did the composer suddenly change key or modulate? Why does the composer repeat this motif? How do sequences impact my interpretation? Dealing with modern music. Modern music involves more repetition. The harmonies aren't always what you expect, and long-term memory is more difficult. Concentration must be intense. The performer might need to invent their own patterns and organizations of the motifs. Psychological research has shown that if a sequence is presented in unpredictable order, it is more difficult to remember. More extra skills regarding interpretation. Stylist, what'd you do here, darling?
I am messing up.
You didn't have enough sleep.
Yeah, replace that guy.
Okay, the next one. Okay, here we go. This is the Scriabin Prelude for the left hand alone. I picked this piece because I wanted to show you what it's like to learn and memorize something that maybe is not quite as accessible to the performer. It's still in a romantic genre, but the music is written at the turn of the century. Now, at first glance, this looks like a piece written for two hands. It looks, you can see the melody. And so you have this accompaniment. But all that has to be done with one hand. And then comes this added little idea. And it comes again on the next line. Now, as you can see, the piece basically looks like it has harmonic organization. The first, I might even say that I remember my teacher once telling me, you don't have to memorize in measure 2 that that's a B sharp. Just memorize it as a C, whatever is convenient for your brain to remember. Now, here we are, and I've got to make sure that the melody is stronger than the other part. So at the beginning, and I notice when I look at the music, I have all thirds. I have the thirds from the first two notes there, the next measures, also thirds, the next line, thirds again. Now there's a change momentarily to a fourth, and then that B goes over to the next chord. Now I start looking to see what notes go from one to the next. The melody gets a little bit complicated because when I get to the next line, we're going to see that the melody isn't always on the top. If you look at measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where it's right after the crash, the next measure, this is now D major. And so I have D major going on. Now the melody's on the bottom. So it would come out to be now, when students are learning a piece, the other thing they really have to incorporate into their interpretation and into their performance is the pedaling. And in this piece, it plays such an important part because I have to suspend certain notes, and it's almost impossible to play them without rolling some of them or using the pedal. So again, that part I just played you, these are all B's. And I keep going back down to the A. Now a B minor harmony. Now this is D augmented, and then I just walk up. Now, but I have to go back to the F sharp on the bottom. Sorry, G sharp. So it's very important to keep track of where I am, which is what adds to the complexity of this piece. Now, you can see from this chart that the A and then the shape, a skip, come down. And notice I've written less all over the place. I have to make sure about that balance that I told you about. Now, the yellow is indicating another complexity to the voicing. And to me, this kind of piece almost defies the normal kind of analysis with dominant seven and things like that, because this augmented chord changes to B minor, and then oh my goodness, well, that looks like a dominant seven chord, but it's spelt with a B sharp in measure 6. I wouldn't want to have to memorize B sharp. I would just want to know to walk up, and then now the next note is C sharp. But before I can play the C sharp, I have to play the A on the bottom here in the left hand. So again, do we have another one that we have? Okay, so now this is what it would look like if I were trying. Okay, so now this one is showing more of the harmonic analysis of what I did. And you can see each measure has at least one chord that I've analyzed, if not more. And it becomes a true mental exercise. This kind of piece, if I don't keep playing it, I lose it. But then if I practice it for about an hour, it all comes back. So this is what the beginning of this would be. So you can see at the end where I really needed the pedal, when I play this chord and I have to go down, and I need to hear that resolve, and I need that to suspend while I play there. So the pedal plays a very important part in this music. Goals for performers. In public performance, never say to yourself, what's the next note? You don't practice that way at home. It is a total break in concentration and disturbs the continuity and the stability of the performance. Concentration suggestions. Sing along while you're playing. Count aloud to yourself. Think about all the different hints. Connect mentally and emotionally to the mucus. Did I say that? Oh boy, was that a slip. Connect mentally and emotionally to the music. Focus. By building confidence, you play with more ease and play competently in public venues. I even have my students use a lot of these ideas for their schoolwork. The idea of long-term memory, of constant retrieval. This really, really helps. Be able to play either hand in case you have a momentary lapse or need backup memory. We know that Gieseking knew the left hand of every piece because usually that's where the harmonic and the support is for your melody. Concentrate on hints at home and on the recital stage. Think consistently, and that's very important. Don't change your mind about what you're going to do, because if you say to your student, when you play this part, you should do this, and then the next week you say, do that, and then they come to play it in a recital and they don't know what they're doing. So it should be very consistent about how they think and what they're thinking about. and what they're listening for. The focus is imperative. Polish a strong beginning to build confidence. The audience will take notice of you. So I always make sure my students have a very strong beginning, maybe the first 4 to 8 measures, because that's when they might be a little nervous and you want them to feel really confident about themselves. And if they're doing a judge recital, the judge sits up and pays notice. And then when they get to the end, that's the last thing the audience is going to remember. So you want to make sure they have a strong ending. I already mentioned Akisaki. So do these methods work? I've tested the suggestions in this presentation on myself, as you can see with the Scriabin, and with my students. As a performer, I've come to realize the true benefits of memorizing in this fashion, mapping and writing in hints, and applying various approaches and methods. My students have demonstrated a stronger, more confident demeanor when playing in public. And when competing, they demonstrate a strong sense of confidence and conviction and are far less nervous. So I had a transfer student. He was in 10th grade when he came to me and was doing a selection from the Waldtepper Clavier. And he said, well, I know how to memorize. And it was all just finger memory. And of course, in a fugue, he had trouble and he got lost and didn't know what to do. It took me almost 6 months to convince this young man that memorizing here in his head would be much more beneficial. So he now writes analysis in every measure. He writes the harmonic analysis, and he is making his way through a slow prelude from book 2. And it is amazing to me. He just sits down. He has it. The next week, he's added 8 or 12 more measures. He has it. It's strong. It's solid. He knows exactly what he's doing. And he turns to me and he says, you were right. Well, it's not a question of being right. It's a question of applying the right kind of memorizing. And I remember as a young girl that my teacher just said, memorize this. And I was kind of lucky. A couple of times it was all memorized and it was just one of those things. But I didn't give it much thought. And when I was at Peabody, I was walking down the hall one day, and there was Nalita True, and you probably know that name. Nalita was working on her doctorate, and she's sitting in the hall holding the music. Nita, what are you doing? Nalita, what are you doing? I'm memorizing. And I went, what? She's looking at the music? She's not even at the piano? She's memorizing. I mean, I used to just do it the way I always did it. Played it a few times and it was a done deal. Well, I went home and I started to look at the music differently. And I realized as I got older and became a graduate student and really getting involved in teaching, that I needed to know more about what was on the page and what was going on in the music. And so I had a whole different perspective about what to do with memory. And I think that it would really behoove your students to learn how to memorize long-term memory. Believe me, you will hear them say, I had a history final, and they studied for it, and 2 days later, they have forgotten everything because they were memorizing at the last second, and then poof, it's gone. That doesn't help us with music. You want to be able to play something all the time. So I ask them to have one piece memorized that will always be there for their friends, their family, wherever they're going, and then they can share their music. And this is my website. I have examples of my performing on there, and I have the student pictures in the gallery. And And now I want to know if I should entertain some questions, or I could also show you a little bit more about how I do the mapping at the lesson. Maybe that would be a good idea. So I'm going
Yeah,
to.
That would be great.
Bonnie.
Yes,
Yeah,
let's
that
do
would be
that.
great. And also not just that, Bonnie, but if you might want to share one example of a student or you creating a story that goes with the piece. I know you mentioned the word story.
Sure thing. Now, hold on a second. I just had my tracing paper. What did I do with that, Alan? I just had it.
I'm still working on mucus.
What did I do with the tracing
I'm
paper?
working on keeping track of that mucus.
Oh, Alan. Honey, what did I do? What did I do with that tracing paper that you just gave me? Did I put that in the other room?
Okay, never mind.
Oh, golly. I'm sorry, forgive me. I hadn't planned on that. And so,
Okay, no.
no. I want to show them how I do that because we have time. But I need the tracing paper.
Okay.
But I don't have a piece of tracing paper. What did I do with it? We moved everything around a little bit here to make room for today. And now, isn't that crazy? Oh, it must be here. Okay. I will use this as an example. So, can you see me? All right. So, for example, if we were going to do that bar talk piece at the lesson, the first thing I would do would put the piece of paper here and then draw the bar lines. Okay, tracing the bar lines right where they are on the page. Then I would look and I would put a piece of Scotch tape here so that when it's time, the student just flips it over and they can look at the music and look at the map. Okay, and then we would start deciding what hints. Well, the student would say, I want to put in the finger number or the first note. And they would write the name of the note and we maybe would put a shape in. And then we would go ahead and maybe put some fingering hints in. So we would make our way measure by measure in that fashion. Now, as far as a story goes, well, I make up different stories. I don't happen to have a story right here in front of me. But for example, the student might say, well, this is me, meaning the student. I'm happy. And this is dissonant. That's my grandfather. He's mad at me. So there's a conflict. Now this one is my mother. She's going to settle the whole problem. Now we're going to be together. Everybody's happier now. A little dissonance and then it resolves. We're together again. Now my sister comes along and says, I want to be part of it too. Something like that, where they would put in what they do, according to the music, maybe if it's sad, they might have lost an animal, a pet, or something like that. They would think about that while they're playing. Does that help? Somebody asked, I don't know who that was, about a story. Hello.
Yep, that was me. That was great. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, something like that. I mean, it sometimes just helps them relate to maybe, of course, we discussed what it was like to live in that time period. We get up and we dance to music, and I show them pictures of what people dress like, and I show them artwork, and so they have something to relate to. as far as the interpretation and what the style of the composer might be. And then as far as improvisation, I teach that all the time in my studio. Maybe they're just doing a cadence and they have to maybe just play 1, 4, and so they're just learning little basic ideas about maybe a little jazzy feeling or a little improvisation. And then, of course, if it's more classical period, like Mozart, they're learning about Alberti bass and they're learning about rolled chords. I think I kind of got through this faster than I thought I was going to. So I'm ready for other questions.
Bonnie, do you so obviously you do this analysis right alongside of your student. Do you ask them to do it sometimes on like do you send them home and say, okay, come back with an analysis or
Absolutely. So I get them started, and some of them are really keen on the idea and pick it up fast. So we usually do 2 to 4 measures, maybe a little more, or I might skip on the page and say, oh, well, let's take a look at this part down here where it's a little different. And then I'll say, could you do this a measure a day? And usually they say yes, they can. And so they'll come back usually with 8 measures. Now, if it's a longer piece and a more mature student, I'll ask them to try for 2 measures a day. But I don't want them to do too many measures because they need to make sure they're going to come back the next day at home, remember the 2 measures they've done, add 2 more measures on, and be able to read the music, read off the map, and then play by memory. And it takes a little bit longer to practice this way. They probably have to add 5 more minutes on to the practice time for the piece. If it's an easier level piece, then they basically, like I do have a fifth grader who is doing Sicilian of Schumann. And it really took her a while to get going. But then, right away, a couple weeks later, she had the whole piece done. It just, sometimes it just clicks. But usually, I'll expect them to do a measure a day, minimum. And I'd rather do that than say you only do 2 measures the whole week, because that's going to take them forever to memorize the piece. But I kind of changed my whole attitude about memorizing. When I was first teaching many, many moons ago, I would teach the student a piece and everything is fine. And it gets to be March, and I would say, oh, we have a performance coming up. Now we have to memorize. Oops. I mean, that was like totally the wrong way to go about it. But I thought that's how the kids were supposed to do it at that time. So I now know that if they're learning a piece, they really have to really, really know it. You memorize it right away. You make observations about those intervals, about the fingering, about the harmony, how it feels under your hands, tapping out the rhythm, anything you can think of to reinforce the whole experience of feeling at home with the piece. Is it going up your way?
I have a question too. So
Yes, of course.
you mentioned about having them improvise on the piece of music. And so I'm assuming you would take maybe one section of the piece that's an easier part to memorize on. And I know that I like to do some improvisation in my studio too, but some kids are more natural at it and others are a little more hesitant. And they might only do it for like 3 or 4 bars and they're done. So I'm just wondering how you encourage that.
Because it's like pulling teeth. Some kids don't want to improvise at all.
Yeah.
So I can't even use that. I try to get them. I try to encourage them to compose or improvise, and it's like the door is shut, and they just don't want to have anything to do with anything that involves their being maybe vulnerable or making a mistake or playing the wrong notes. They have a different attitude about what it means to improvise. And so I think that if you can do it from the get go, it really helps. Even with a 5 or 6 year old, to get them to make up something. I remember one time I heard somebody say, what would happen if instead of this the composer did that? What would happen if you changed some notes and made the piece different? uh, and so the whole thing could change. Let's say, for example, and I've made up a whole nother piece, but I've kept some of the harmonies that were there. I kept some of the shape. um, I think that if a student is introduced to a lot of different music, in my studio we get together, the kids and we listen to music, and we discuss interpretations, and we listen to different people play the same piece so that they get an idea of what it's like to listen to classical period music or Baroque period music or romantic. So they need to know the style that their piece is. And of course, if it's a more modern piece like Bartok, they can go and play lots of dissonances, and the music would sound really kind of cool that way. And if it's Mozart, I mean, it's a whole nother bag of potatoes. So, someone could go, I mean, there's so many things that somebody could do if they were improvising. But I brought up that example about Rubinstein because it just blew my mind that he was able to keep playing in the style of Ravel, in the style of, I don't remember whether it was the Pavane or what he was playing, but the Rigaudon, but he kept that going. And his mind is thinking, where is it on the page? That's where I want to go. I mean, to me, that's pure genius to be able to do that. So I do know that a lot of teachers will say, if you screw up, just jump to there. And I mentioned that earlier, that I'm not totally convinced of that, because when you jump somewhere, wait a minute, that might not fit harmonically where you were. So uh, it the idea of seeing that music going across the page as you're playing, and you're imagining the next line and the next line and the next line. All of these things, these visual ideas, can help you. And if they do this at home, if they get dressed up, if they walk to their piano and bow and put out some chairs, I say just put stuffed animals on the chairs. Put yourself in a performing mode, because you don't give a recital in a pair of pajamas or sweatpants. And I mean, you're all dressed up, so it feels different when you're all dressed up. Try to put yourself into that mood, into that environment. And so rehearsing and then thinking, okay, oh, what's the next note? You would never do that at home. You just don't do it. It doesn't happen. You're so comfortable in your own environment, and your teacher's not looking over your shoulder and making you nervous. Nobody's there. You're feeling really at ease. You need to sort of have that same idea of comfort when you go and you play for your teacher or your friends or a recital. And the more often they do it, they get comfortable. But the improvising part, That's tricky. That's hard.
So, one other thing. So, a number of years ago, I was in a workshop by Noah Kajiyama. I don't know if you know who he is. His name is Noah, is the first name, then Kajiyama, and he has this blog called The Bulletproof Musician, and and he was taught his specialty is sort of performance anxiety. Um, and so one of the couple of the things that I took away from that workshop, one was that when you go to perform, don't overthink. Just sit down and just play it the way it feels. As a matter of fact, almost don't even think and think about the way it feels. Um, and so I, told that to my students many times, but I often think, wow, is this really true? Because I mean, just turn your brain off. I'm just wondering, how do you feel about that?
That's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you turn off what you've been doing at home, if you're not using those concentration skills that you were using at home, and you suddenly get up in front of an audience and you have a different apparatus modem that I'm just going to play the notes and hope for the best. I think that's a little tricky. I know that for myself, that when I perform, there's an involvement in the music, that I'm more involved in my storytelling. I might be thinking about some of the harmonies or what's coming or this or that. But if I just go totally blank, I'm I I'm not going to make it. I know that if I sing along, that's even just quietly inside of me, it is a terrific way of concentrating. And sometimes I even count. That gets me focused, so I don't think about the audience at all. And I want to think about the audience as communication, but I don't want to think about, like, oh, I just saw such and such in the audience, and that makes me a little nervous. But I mean, focusing. I have to tell you that one time I gave a concert with a deaf guy standing at the end of the piano. He came over after I played my first piece, handed me a note, and said, "May I stand here? I am deaf." That's all it said. And he went to the end of the piano. He was kind of dressed it was summertime, and he was in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. And the audience told me he just stood there, didn't even shuffle his feet. The but the problem was, I was playing Beethoven's 111, Opus 111. Okay, Beethoven's deaf, and on the keyboard fallboard was all of the scenery that was painted in different colors. This was a 100-year-old piano in rosewood, and I started to play, and I'm going like, oh my God, don't look up, he's deaf. Oh my God, Beethoven was deaf. Oh my God, look at this. No, no, don't look there, because I had practiced down at the hall, so I would get used to that. But it was like, Beethoven was deaf. Don't look up. No, it took me at least a page to get through the beginning of the Beethoven before I could just settle in and not think about this guy at the other end of the piano. Can you talk about a distraction? And their air conditioning broke down. So all I heard was this, with the audience fanning themselves. It was really fascinating. What an experience. So everybody has something different about concentrating. I can understand. I think what that man meant was that you want the music to be the experience and not the analysis and all the other stuff. But yeah, everybody has to sort of work their way through. I like that idea. It's just that in that particular case, I mean, man, that was a tough one.
Yeah, I can understand what you're saying. Like, I have my reservations too. I can understand where he's coming from, and to just go with the feel with it after you've done all your practicing and you have like your routines down, and then just do it. But then it seems I feel like I can't just turn off my brain though. I have to just keep thinking too. So,
I have a question about parts versus the whole. So, like,
Parts?
I have a question about the whole piece versus little parts. And like before you start a student on mapping of a piece, do you play through the entire piece for the student? And do you encourage the student to listen to other recordings through the week or discourage that?
That is a wonderful question. Let me take a little bit at a time. I sometimes play the big part of the piece because I say to the student, "This is a really cool piece. Let me show you what this sounds like." I don't like that. So I have to pick out something else. How about this? Well, I like the middle part. Okay, so it's worth learning the first part to get to the middle part that you really like. Okay, willing to do that. Um, that works out okay. But I very well, if it's a short piece like the Soldiers March, it's over in 20 seconds. I could play that for them and say, "What do you think of this piece?" Now, the other thing was, I'm sorry about.
I think what
Do you encourage them to listen to the
Oh,
piece
yes, yes, yes. Well,
through the
no,
week?
no, not until they really know the piece. And a case in point was this little girl who's doing Sicilian. It took her a while to get used to this rhythm because, and they had these, longer notes and whatever. And we worked very hard on the rhythm. And a month later, she comes in. What? What's this? What's this? What are you doing? And the mother tells me, "Oh, we listened to a recording on YouTube and it was real fast. And so we're trying to do it." I did not give them permission to go on YouTube to listen to it. And even if they go on YouTube, please don't listen to some little kid play and don't listen to a fast recording. We had to undo what was in her ear. It took a week. And so I will let them listen to a recording for interpretation, maybe the idea of how fast the piece might eventually be, but not until they've got a good start. I remember that Fleischer, he absolutely hated the idea of our listening to recordings. He said, you need to have, of course, it's more advanced, but you need to have your own ideas and your own thinking and your own interpretation, and then you can listen to whoever you want for additional ideas or whatever you want. But I think it can be, I know that they have those recordings in the back of a lot of books. And basically, if they have bought that, I'm sorry, but I tear the CD out and I say, "I'm sorry, no, you can't have this." And I keep it until they're ready for it. So I would say that it would depend on the student, but basically, I try to discourage that. And I definitely, if they're going on YouTube, which is like, oh, everybody's on YouTube, I'll say, if you listen to YouTube, you have to make sure you're listening to a really good performer, an artistic person, and not some 10-year-old who plays ridiculously fast and has no soul. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Bonnie, I had a question, if I may. First of all, thank you so much for just this wealth of information, giving us a lot to think about. I have one question. I really try to use memorization as a vehicle for really opening up my students' ears. So I have them do a lot of singing in the lesson. But my question is this. Occasionally, we'll have a student, particularly a beginning student, who has a lot of trouble singing on pitch. So, for example, if I ask them to sing the bass line because I want them to internally hear it, and I do a lot of playbacks and ear training with them so that they can hear steps and hear skips, and the ear is just another thing to guide the fingers. But sometimes I have trouble with certain students in really developing the oral part of the memorization. Have you encountered this, and do you have any suggestions?
Well, I have definitely encountered that. where I play a pitch and the kid goes, and I say higher, lower, I work really hard also trying to get the kids to learn how to sing. And they're very shy about that. Some of them will hum. I said, that's fine. We can hum. Um, One suggestion I have, I don't know if it works, that they all have to be able to sing the pitch of one of their pieces, how it starts. Whether they're like an octave lower. So if she's down here, that's okay. As long as she can sing that E. If she has that E in her ear, in her sound. So she knows that he starts that way. So I have them, I say, you walk around the house, sing the pitch, walk to the piano, see if you're right. If you're not, you walk away, you come back again. And I'll do this. Now sing the beginning note. Bottom. So that really tests whether they've got that pitch in their ear. But as far as singing, it is really hard. If I had the group of kids together, they will sing as a group. Ask one kid to sing.
No, no.
Not me, Miss Kellert. Somebody else, It's just, and I can understand that, they get more self-conscious about that kind of thing. But I think that in America, we might be going about it wrong, because in Europe, they teach them solfege, they have to sing their piece, they have to write their piece, they have to really know it inside and out before they start to play it. And they really do have in-depth solfege training. My student went to Hungary. Oh my God, she came back and she just, I mean, I couldn't believe what she could do. She was at this Liszt Academy and she was there for one semester. Well, she ended up becoming a cantor, so she was always into singing. But what she could do was just amazing. I was blown away. So I do try to spend time with intervals, Jonathan. I don't know whether that helps the kids. I ask them to sing a scale going up, like 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 4, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, so that they're learning the intervals plus parts of the scale, and then they have to sing the whole scale. But I use numbers. I don't usually use solfege. I find that numbers are easier. Therefore, it would be like having a movable dough, because every time they start a scale, they're starting on the next one. But I don't know if that's going to help. But I would just give singing exercises to the kids.
So,
And make it really simple.
so Jonathan, I mean, I used to do youth choirs, and I was a youth music director in my church for a number of years. And I couldn't believe when I started day one how many kids in the choir that I inherited were tone deaf. They couldn't match pitch. Luckily, there were a lot of kids in the group, so they could kind of cover over some of the ones that couldn't match pitch. But in my attempt to try to help these kids out, I came across a video by somebody named Helen Pemp. Now, this was a number of years ago. This was in the 90s. She was amazing, her suggestions. And one of the things that I learned is there's different reasons why kids don't sing in pitch. One could be their throat, that they don't feel it in their throat, the placement of where their vocal cords have to go. And of course, it could be that they're not hearing the pitch too. So it could be orally. But some of the techniques that I picked up from her was matching, so that they would sing the pitch and then they would sing it off, and then I would sing it on and then match their pitch so they could see how different it was from what they were singing to what the true pitch was. Another thing is to draw a picture on a paper, on a graph, and say, okay, here's the pitch where it is, and this is where you are on the paper, so they could see the distance that way too. So there's like a lot of little, and then also to tell them to sing in their head voice, to have them, look, if they can't sing a high one, it's because they can't sing high. They don't know how their voice has to go up high. So it was to have them imitate things like birds squeaking or really high things, or imitate with their voice low things so they would feel it in their voice. So those are just a few little tips that I picked up from my choir experience.
Super idea. Those are wonderful. One other thing, I don't know if it would help. Of course, those people teach voice, so I don't teach voice. But in class, I'll play a note. Let's say I play a C sharp. Okay, so I go around one at a time. This is C sharp. I say, would you sing a whole step up? And I can hear them going, and then eventually they get there. And then I'll say, what is this note? And they'll have to tell me that that's C. So they're learning intervals to sing them and identify them, but also that they have to. I start with steps and skips. It's easier that way, and then starting with songs that they know, which is tough these days. These kids don't go to musicals. They don't even know The Sound of Music or Oklahoma or any of the things that we all grew up with. And I certainly don't know anything from, I don't know, Aquarius. I don't even know any of that. That's old. But I mean, I don't even know any of these things that they're singing now. I wouldn't know how to sing a Taylor Swift song if you even put it in front of me. So um, their songs that they play are just they're just into different stuff than I am. So I'm trying to get them to think about. I said, look, Bach's music is from what time? And they all know. Okay, born in. They know. It died in 1750. Okay, fine. How long ago is that? That's not even when the United States existed. You're talking about a long time ago. And they have no concept of even 50 years, yet 100 years. And I said, this music has lasted 250 years. This is really great music. You've got to learn it and know it and appreciate it. And that's, an important part of growing and learning about, the traditions of music. Yeah. So I don't know whether I answered your question, Jonathan, because that is, I know that's tough. Yeah. Anybody else? Well, I see some nice smiles, so I hope that means that it was okay. I went through this, I think, faster than I've ever done it, because I did rehearse it, but I wanted to make sure I got done in time.
You sure did. I just want to make sure, does anyone else have any questions or comments? I would just want to make sure that we're inviting anyone to speak who wishes to.
I wouldn't mind asking Bonnie, of the three senses, would you agree that the kinesthetic is the weakest?
Absolutely.
And I once had a teacher who employed this technique of having us, when memorizing, to play, say, the right hand part, but use the left hand to do it, or vice versa. And I wondered what you thought about that.
Okay, it's so interesting you brought that up. I was performing the first cantata of Bach, which to me is 15 minutes of just sheer terror because it's nonstop with two fugues that are very similar. And I won't say who I went over to because this was a person of national renown. I said, "How would you practice this? Because I'm having trouble getting through without having a problem." "Oh, you should play the left hand part with the right hand." And then I went over to John Perry. Well, we all know John Perry. And he said, "That's hogwash." But what he did say that was interesting is to play through a certain passage. And then, of course, then it's going to maybe even go into the right hand, but to look for the voicing. And he related that to learning the well-tempered clavier fugues, that he teaches it through voicing. And I remember I had a friend who taught fugues hand separate. And I said to her, well, wait a minute. the voice sometimes goes into the other hand. This is counterpoint music. How can you do hands separate? It doesn't do anything whatsoever. So, yeah, I think that I don't know what the point of that was, except to twist your brain all up. I
So,
think that was supposed to be testing you,
uh-huh.
but I don't see what good it does you. You're not going to play the piece that way.
So
My
I'm a little
teacher had
confused.
me,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
do that.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry. For a type of melody, like let's say like a melody that is very clearly in the right hand, like maybe part of a Chopin nocturne, and it's very vocal like, it has skips and steps. My teacher, Seymour Bernstein, to really check my oral memory is first of all, he'd have me sing it. And then he'd say, take the second finger of your left hand, use your ear to guide your knowledge of the intervals. Can you pick out that tricky spot with your left hand? As just a way of checking, are you internally hearing it? Obviously, you're not going to play it that way. What I like about that, and I still do this, is it forces me to think about something in a different way. So I'll do that not necessarily with a whole piece, but I might do it with a section of a melody that kind of has a big range and that doesn't move too quickly, you know. But it's something to try if you like. I don't do it with everything, but I found that helpful with a specific type of melody when memorizing.
And definitely with a nocturne to play the left hand and sing the melody. I mean, and I do that with a lot
Yes.
of left hand music, where there's a big separation, and you have your accompaniment, and you can sing the melody, and then I will sing the melody while I play, because that's really helping me with my breathing and the shaping of the phrases. Yeah. Oh, so I also took that question about the toccata to Angela Hewitt. All of this, like within the same week. And this was like a few months before the concert, and I was just really pretty much a wreck. And first she said, well, why don't you just play it with the music? And I said, no, I don't think I want to do that. And then it's a very interesting toccata. If you ever look at the first toccata, and so I said, I'm just having trouble. I find myself like, where do I go next with it's jumping around here and she just said, oh, you mean you find yourself skipping 2 pages ahead? And so she said, you really just need to, get a think about what where you are. She mapped it out like where she was on the page. And John Perry pretty much was telling me, and this reminds me of what one of you was saying about playing through. But he said, try to visualize where you are on the page as you're playing. Okay. And that was very helpful until I realized right away one fugue starts at the top of the left page and the second fugue starts in the middle of the left page. I mean, that really was not enough of a difference to help me with these two themes. But I must say, I made it through. I did it. And it was very important to have that conversation with Angela Hewitt because I was playing at the Phillips Collection in Washington, where Glenn Gould gave his debut in Washington. So there's sort of like this, I'm playing Bach and I'm playing, where Glenn Gould played, and she knew the venue because she knew all about Glenn Gould because she's Canadian. And basically, I mean, people come up with different ideas, and they're all good ideas that you've talked about. I think that I'm glad we had this talk because I'm always learning from other teachers. I haven't stopped learning. Mm, excellent ideas. Thank you.
Well, this is excellent. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Bonnie?
Oh,
Excellent. Well, Bonnie, we want to give you a big bravo if everyone can. Give a nice little silent applause for Bonnie. Bonnie, thank you for your flexibility. Again, we're lucky that we were able to do this on Zoom to spare everyone, including yourself, from driving into the snowstorm that we have today. Of course, we miss meeting in person, but we'll get to do that next month. But Bonnie, your presentation was so excellent. We feel like we're right in the living room with you.
Oh, well, I
Miriam, do
enjoyed.
you have?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
I
Bonnie.
enjoy mainline, because I've presented with you guys before, and I'm just sorry I couldn't be up there. It's actually a really good idea that I didn't have to drive in this mess. So, but I want to thank you again for inviting me, and I hope that you'll look at the handout, which is really very specific and gives a lot of those ideas, because I felt like I was going kind of fast, and I want to make sure that it's something that, again, opening another door for ideas to help your students. I just know that I've applied ideas about long-term memory with my students as far as school goes, and I keep pounding it into them. I say, imagine you're studying medicine. Okay, fine, you have to memorize a lot of stuff. Now, you're an adult and you go to your doctor, and the doctor says, wait a minute, I have to go look that up. I don't remember. And they go in their office and they have to look that up. Can you imagine having a doctor like that who can't remember things? You don't want that. So when you're learning your whatever it is you're learning, you want to really remember it. Yeah.
Excellent advice.
Else.
Miriam, do you have anything you want to add or announce?
I don't think so. But Bonnie, thank you very much. Quality presentation, very detailed, and I'm glad that we all got to, ask a few questions and give our input as well. And that's really what it's all about, is everyone getting together and discussing things like this. And appropriate, Bonnie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and
Thank you so much.
thank you all very much for your ideas. Super. You're a great group of teachers.
We are, and I can tell you a number of people are going to watch the video later. That has had an impact. So, great. Well, listen, folks, I'm going to leave the Zoom open for a few minutes in case people want to say hello to each other. It's not a requirement, it's just an invitation. But again, Bonnie, thank you for everything. Please know, everybody, I did attach the handout to the e-blast for this meeting. We will also make it available on the website, which will be protected by a password, so that should satisfy the copyright issues. But again, Bonnie, thank you so much. I'm going to save the recording, Bonnie, and make it available to you to do with whatever you like. And thank you, Alan, for being the ghost in the machine there.
He's sitting right
and
over.
Thanks again to everybody. Like I said, I'm going to keep the Zoom open for a few minutes in case anyone wants to say hello. And again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to Joan for sharing her information about scales. And we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting, which will be at the church, about the French teaching repertoire. So goodbye for now. Of course, anyone who wishes to stay, I'll keep it open for a few minutes.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, I'm going to
Take
stop
care.
I will stop.